You have an idea. You want to tell it to the world, but you don't know where to start. That's where Anchor comes in. They have the tools for you to edit, produce, and record your idea right from your phone or computer. It's the easiest way to reach and grow your audience. They publish for you to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all major platforms. And to top it all off, they match you with advertisers so you can earn from your passion and your wonderful idea. So tell me, what are you waiting for? Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started and follow your dream. So we are here with Felipe Soares, recording at Zeal Conference. And Felipe, just tell me, you're from Brazil, right?
That's right, brother.
How do you feel when you guys lost 7-1?
Honestly, I feel like we've moved past that at this point. We've moved past
it.
After we saw Germany's treatment in this last World Cup, it kind of did some justice for us. You know,
so there was some retribution.
There was a slight bit of retribution.
The guts of football made it good for you.
They made it happen. So it's good to know that these gods of football are watching over us.
Okay, all right. Well, maybe next World Cup, big things can happen. You never know. The golden era, right? At this point. We're not talking about soccer today. We're going to be talking about immigration and just, the interaction for members, pastors, and anyone that comes as an immigrant to this country. You yourself are an immigrant, right, Felipe?
That's right. Right.
So, and you go by the handle in Instagram of Pastor Dreamer.
That's correct.
You identified with the Dreamer community.
That's correct. I'm a DACA recipient, so I identify as a dreamer here in the United States.
And how has it been? Like, how is the American dream for you? Are you restless, or is it a nightmare? Is it a dream for you so far?
I can honestly say, Jose, that for me, thank God, I have a hope that transcends this world. But I can't say the same for my fellow dreamers that don't have the hope that I have, which they fear this dichotomy of living in limbo because of politics for so long. The stress that comes with it. You already got to do the stress of regular life, and you got this added stress upon you every single day that, you never know. One of these days, somebody could just pull the rug from under you and say, hey, I guess you guys are on your own. We've been hearing constant talks about, maybe perhaps in the past having the DACA program removed, have something else instituted without actually talking about something better than it. So it's kind of tricky. It's a tricky situation. A lot of uncertainty in the dreamer community, but we'll continue to move on.
So on top of the financial, family, just faith or, religion, whatever, just regular life, school stress, you're saying there is this like uneasiness about your condition, like documentation and just presence in the United States. Now, for those who do not know, maybe like people that are outside of the States that listen to us, thank you. Shout out to you guys for listening. From Australia, from New Zealand, from England, China. We're getting some listeners from China, but
awesome.
They may not know what DACA is. So can you explain in like a short snippet what a DACA recipient means?
Sure. So DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It's a program that was created came into fruition in the year 2012 under the Obama administration. Basically, it was a plan to allow children that came into the United States with their parents many years ago. Of course, they had no volition or choice of their own but to come with their parents and remained illegal or undocumented here in the country. So basically, the initiative was to create a possibility to allow these children who were then already young adults to work, to be able to receive a driver's license, and to have a Social Security document.
So it seems to me that most of the things that you mentioned are very basic needs for the American in the United States. Are there any other privileges that DACA allows for individuals?
No, that's pretty much it. It's basically just the ability to legally work in the United States and to have a legal driver's license. that is pretty much it. And a social security, because you can't work legally in the country without a social security.
You're pretty much not getting a lot of benefits.
No, not at all. It's very, very basic, very bare to the bone. And unfortunately, it doesn't have any pathway towards citizenship in the legal system. It's very like plateau.
Right. For DACA recipients, you know, you can go to school, right? Legally.
Of course. Well, the truth of the matter is that if you're in this country without a social security, you can still attend university. There's no law barring that. I remember when I started university, we had to put in place of the social security something called the I-10. And the I-10 is basically this number in which every immigrant in this country, whether, you know, documented or undocumented, have the possibility to have, but it's especially beneficial to those who are undocumented so that they can return their financial gain to the government
and
exactly
help people and
exactly
everything that tax,
and especially the social security system, security people, even though they themselves don't benefit from it, they still have the possibility to do that.
Right. That's interesting. Do you feel any sort of prejudice? I mean, in your churches, like where you attend, like do people look at you differently because you're not per se have the complete privileged documentation in this country? Do people look at you differently?
No, I have not come face to face with that as of yet. The people that I have truly let into my life and opened up about this, they have been very supportive, especially the senior pastor of the church that I'm serving at. They have been very supportive from the very start. However, I have come into some weird situations with members, not of my church, but of other churches that I've conversed with, where, you know, snarky comments or maybe an unfunny joke has been thrown into the equation that was kind of hurtful against, you know, people in my situation or undocumented immigrants in general.
Do you feel like undocumented immigrants have, you know, major hurdles in this country that will never be lifted? I mean, let me put it kind of into this conversation where, you know, there are hurdles that communities of color, you know, are still battling with, even after the abolition of slavery, even after, you know, the civil rights movement. You know, we're still dealing with a lot of, you know, racist policies or very segregational policies or very unjust, you know, policies. Do you feel like undocumented immigrants have that, you know, difficulty, you know, and it's perpetual? Do you think it's going to be perpetual?
I feel like it's something that's been ongoing. And what has been ongoing is this whole climate of fear. You know, I feel like either the status of the country as it is today, or maybe perhaps how it has been for about a decade or so, has created a general foundation of fear within undocumented immigrants, to the point where many of them do not even leave their local towns. Even they don't go past certain, you know, borders of states. They're afraid to even, you know, travel as far as 50 miles away from their local settings, because they're afraid that somewhere, somehow, a police officer will bar them and find out, you know, that they're here undocumented, and for some reason that will put them in an immigrant detention center.
So is that system of oppression, you know, like detrimental? In what areas has it been detrimental to the Hispanic, Latino, and even Asian communities that do come here undocumented? You know, that's one thing that a lot of people don't know. That's
right.
It's not only Latinos. Like, sure, you know, Mexicans are closer to the border, and, you know, Central America, or like you can work your way up even from Argentina all the way to the United States. But there's a lot of Asians that do come to the United States undocumented, or that stay or overstay their visas, right? So yeah, I mean, like, how is it impacting these people groups? What are some of the negative effects that is having? You know, give me some areas that it has impacted you, maybe.
Yeah, exactly like how you say. It's good that you touched on it, because I was reading a book by a very popular undocumented immigrant here in this country that's actually making major moves for the undocumented immigrant community. His name is Jose Antonio Vargas. And basically, he's Filipino. And unfortunately, he came to America at a very young age because of a scheme that his grandfather, who is a legal resident, put him through. And I've been discussing with people from all sorts of backgrounds. And I've come to realize that, yes, like you said, the majority of undocumented immigrants in America, they are simply overstaying their visas, because they either been put through a scheme because of a family member or a lawyer mishandled their case or something happened. So there's definitely different scenarios, but all of those things, like I said, they boil down to this idea of fear of not being able to truly self-actualize themselves in the country that they sought to self-actualize themselves the most. I mean, about a year ago in spring, at my old university, Andrews University, we started a support group. We started a support group for young undocumented immigrants. And some friends of mine and myself, we joined together, and we had about 10 students attend on a weekly basis so that we could take their focus away from the craziness of the politics and the craziness of Congress that was talking so much about doing away with DACA by the March 2018 deadline, and putting all of their stress and all of their worries instead into the hands of God by focusing on the gospel of hope of Jesus. So it was a really awesome experience to be there listening to their stories, and also hearing from some of them that very little group that met for only about 4.5 to 5 months was the bridge that kept them from, well, I wouldn't say bridge. I would say it's more like the guardrail that kept them from falling into the abyss of doubt and fear and complete, separation from God. So that was really awesome.
I just want to remind our listeners that there's a lot of background noise because we're here at Zeal recording live.
Zeal. Zeal is lit. So.
Yeah, Zeal. There's a lot of stuff going around, children, and the different things. But something that I wanted to kind of touch on, when I hear you about, you were saying like there was this safe place, to kind of like for people to come and to discuss. But something that I want to ask is like, do you think that Christianity or Adventism has been detrimental to the Latin American experience in this country? Like, do you think American Protestantism is it positive or is it a negative thing?
I haven't really thought about that one. Can you clarify that a little bit more?
Yes. So, in America, when I came, I'm an immigrant as well, and the way that church runs here is very different than church in Nicaragua, for example, right? And many other Latin American countries. Everyone has its own flavor. Do you think that coming to America, living the American dream, having dollars, and contributing, getting into this Jesus, kind of like, I think the perception of Jesus is different in every country, but like, do you think that adopting the American dream mentality and the American Jesus savior has been a positive thing for Hispanics, for their mental health, for their work? Do you think Christianity is a good thing in America for Hispanics, or do you think that they long for? Because we can talk about, maybe you can expand on this as well, like models of authority. Hispanics, you have this authoritarianism, very like people think that this is the only way, right? You follow the leader. And in America, you encounter a little bit more of like, this is a more democratic, we're going to vote. So are those, which aspects of Christianity in America, the American Christian experience, are positive and which ones are negative in your experience and in the things that you have seen?
Okay, thank you for clarifying. I grew up in a church, a first generation immigrant church in Long Island, New York, and it was not very much different. Like you described, it's basically very authoritarian. It's very, one leader. Of course, the pastor's kind of like dictating everything, and everybody else is just following along. And maybe perhaps it's just a part of the Latino reality. You know, we just come from a culture where we completely respect the elder, and the elder commands and the elder controls. And when that isn't in place, like you said, in the other perspective of the North American context of Christianity, I feel like oftentimes they get lost. It gets lost in translation. So some might be even a bit discouraged about proceeding with their Christian faith here in this country. But it's not even just, you know, levels of dynamics of leadership. It's also about, you know, like you mentioned, money. And money is paramount in this country. Oftentimes we have immigrants sacrificing their faith because they're pursuing a job. You know, it's all about just following, you know, where the work is, where the job is. So many of them, you know, put that completely at a priority, even if they are people of devout faith in their home countries. Nevertheless, as soon as they come into the American context, which is so vastly different in its pursuit for, I would say, maybe materialism, that they often forfeit their faith altogether.
Those are very hard words to hear, you know, forfeiting their faith altogether. So you're saying that sometimes it's not the American experience, but the country itself can be very detrimental, you know, not the American Christian experience, but sometimes, you know, it's enmeshed in a culture that may make you forget about your faith, make you forget about values sometimes. So the question stands then, how do we not allow this system, you know, to perpetuate and maybe to damage our faith? What are you engaging in right now that is helping people reclaim their faith and miss the quote unquote American dream?
Well, thanks for asking the question. Honestly, it boils down to community in the end. Immigrants are in need of community. They're looking for community, and the community sort of assists in dictating or communicating what the overall goals, what the overall vision will be for the immigrant. I know of many people that have come straight out of Brazil, where I'm from, and they were people of devout faith, and they come to America, and like I told you, it's the switch in situation where money first, Christ second. I feel like this is all the more important for us as immigrant communities, as Latinos, as, you know, people who are immigrants in this country, to be able to realize this dichotomy and be able to formulate a network of support. When it comes to immigration, all of these people just want to belong. You know, they're constantly being bombarded in the media day in and day out, internet, TV, newspapers, that they're not embraced, that they're not cared for, that they're not important in this country, that they're criminals, animals, you name it, the list goes on. That's all the more important for immigrant Christians or immigrant SDAs in this country, and even non-immigrants too. They can engage into the situation and assist, all the better. But to create support networks and support circles within the local church context, which will allow for the immigrant's voice to be expressed, the immigrant to be heard, the situations to be spoken. And it has to be intentional, because immigrants, it's weird. The situation is weird. Like I told you, we spoke about fear. Fear is it's such an anchor in the immigrant's life that they're not willing to allow strangers in, for fear, like I told you, of deportation, of arresting, of all of these situations. So whichever church context is creating initiatives like this, they have to be extra intentional in really being there in their circles, in their communities, and conversing with them, and being able to educate them and equip them with the resources that they are looking for. They're looking for resources so that they can improve their livelihoods, their living, and also in the middle of that, infusing the love of Jesus. That's all the more important.
America is a country of immigrants. And, you know, you're a first generation, but really a second generation Latino in the United States. You bring a different story, a different narrative, you know, than most people. You learn English, whereas maybe your parents or your grandparents may not know that language, you know, and you may carry a different tradition from that one. And when you're creating these spaces of belonging, do you think that in the current conversation is Christianity and maybe specifically Adventism allowing for that diversity to remain? Because, for example, we're both speaking in English, even though we have a different mother tongue, right? So there is a process of assimilation, but I still consider myself, you know, Nicaraguan in the same way that you consider yourself Brazilian, right? So like, do you think that how can we keep that diversity even though we're still assimilating into this country? How can we do that? And, you know, I mean, I think it's also for those individuals that may be listening and you're thinking like, well, you know, I was born in this country. I'm not an immigrant. Well, the reality is that at some point in time, someone came from a different country, you know, and like you're still an immigrant. You're a foreigner, you know, in this land, even though you may have been born here, you know, at the same time, like you have a rich history, you know, you're not just black or white or, you know, whatever it is, whatever color you want to denote yourself, brown or, you know, whatever it is, you have a rich history. How do we keep that history while at the same time assimilating into the culture? How do we keep that balance?
That's a really good question. Because it's a tricky situation. When it comes to many immigrants such as you and I, it's very easy for us to surrender our identity with our mother countries. I don't know, you know, about your context in particular, but my context being a DACA recipient, being a dreamer, coming to this country when I was 10 years old with my parents, and being told that we weren't going to be here for more than 2 or 3 years and then we were going to return and, you know, all was going to be well again. And then 5, 10, 15, almost 20 years go by. And that feeling of non-belonging persisting at the bottom of it all, you know, and seeing situations such as in politics, you know, talking about DACA, doing away with the current DACA system. But nevertheless, there's no resolution. There's no linking into something else that could improve the situation of immigrants like me. It can be very disheartening and very discouraging, like I told you before. But in the end of it all, we need to find methods to celebrate this diversity in all contexts, and especially, like you said, in the Christian church. I come from a context where in Chicago, we are pastoring a very diverse community of people. It's a multi-ethnic church in its truest form, really. We got people from Asia, people from Africa, Europe, some from Latin America as well. And we have international events on the regular, and we make sure to involve the community in the process as well as we embrace each other's music, each other's food, each other's languages, each other's art. It's an amazing experience. And in the end of it all, it's these practical little ways of embracing each other's culture and traditions. It's that we embrace each other's identities. And we bond and we connect as a people.
I like what you said, and I think that those are, you know, good steps in order to start, you know, like celebrating the community and you know, kind of like the diversity that is within churches, you know, to start maybe having an international day, or like, you know, maybe having a Jamaican day, or, you know, Congoan day? Oh, how do you say that? I need to research that.
I feel like Google can help us.
But, you know, essentially, like, you know, South African, or, you know, maybe you're from Ghanaian. There you go.
Yeah, there you go.
I got that one.
That's it.
Brazilian, Argentinian, you know, Peruvian. I can recite those pretty quick. But yes, just, you know, like maybe a French day, you know, or a Spaniard day, you know, Korean, you know, whatever it is that is in your community. Just do that. And I think that it can start from doing very meaningful things, like maybe sing in a different language for one hymn, or like, you know, maybe have a day where you, maybe a prayer. Yeah. Or like, reading of the scriptures. Anything helps in order to celebrate and retain that diversity while at the same time helping people assimilate into the country. Well, Felipe, thank you very much for, taking the time to talk about this kind of convoluted conversation, and it's stressful, stressful for many undocumented people and for DACA recipients, for everyone that's in this country. Asylum seekers, that's a whole other conversation that we may not have time for. But if you want to leave us with a final word, what can we do? Some practical steps. This is your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation and the opportunity. My one last word would be to anybody that's listening that is a first generation immigrant such as myself, and you have ever felt like you were out of place or you didn't belong, or this country just seemed to be bashing you in some way, shape, or form, and it looks like avenues towards progression in the American society just seem to be closing and closing and closing. My word to you would be this. Don't ever lose faith in our God, because our God is an immigrant God. Never forget that he had to leave his heavenly throne and immigrate into a sinful world to give us life so that you and I will be more than dreamers, but that we could live the dream, which is citizenship in a completely perfect world. So in the end of it all, doesn't matter what you're going through, believe and trust in this amazing immigrant God.
You've been listening to Disruptive Adventism. We hope that today's topic helped you to think and change something about your practices, about your faith, about your Adventism. If you want to subscribe, make sure to go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be there. And make sure to give us a review if you like what you're listening to. If you want to support, make sure to go to patreon.com/disruptiveadventism. It helps us pay our bills and produce the content that you're listening to. And if you want to socialize, make sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram or on Twitter, and hit us up whenever you need anything. We'll be there to support you. Thank you for listening today. We hope you join us next time. And as always, we invite you to be disruptive.